and welcome back to the Chasing Love podcast. I'm Cameron, and this is my wife,
Heather.
We're excited for you to be here with us. This is episode 3 of the podcast. Sorry for the delays. We had a lot of things going on over the past couple of weeks and kind of got behind on some things. So thanks for sticking with us. Make sure if you are looking for more daily content, you can check out our social media pages. There'll be links down below, as well as our new blog for daily devotionals. Again, links down below, but that'll be kind of a little more daily content that you can get. We had taken a poll a while back, and I think what most people want to see from us is a weekly shorter podcast. So that's what we're going to be doing versus a every other week longer podcast. So this is our first episode of the new format. So once again, thanks for sticking with us, and let's get right into it. Ready?
Sure, let's go.
So we are going to be kind of covering some of the topics that we've talked about in our devotional. And so we're going to start it off with kind of helping you discover what your purpose for your marriage is. Questions we've asked each other, things we've kind of gone over recently, and just after 14 years of marriage, seeing if we're still in tune with what our purpose is. And so I think we are, but a question you can ask yourself, and we'll kind of be answering, is why did God bring you and your spouse together? Why do you feel like we're together?
I feel like we're together because God has a plan for our lives to create a family and to further his ministry. I mean, yeah. I feel like when you are married, if you're married to the person that God's actually like placed for you, then not only do you have your sole purpose of what you're supposed to be doing, but together that can either be someone who builds up that and like encourages that, and also together as a couple, you can have that strength of like moving forward in that purpose, whether it be together or separately, and kind of forming together.
Yeah. Actually, one of the scriptures that we have is from Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and it talks about how two are better than one because they have a good reward. It's a great song, isn't it?
Is.
Hey, I didn't realize that. That's a spiritual song. People want to say. But anyways, it says that because they have a good reward for their toil. So that's why two are better than one. If they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has no one to lift him up. I know there's been a lot of times lately where I have needed lifting. Hello. Humphrey.
Say hello to Humphrey.
Little cameo there. So I know that lately there's been a lot of times where I've needed some uplifting, and there have been times where we've not been right around each other, and it was really hard to feel uplifted. And then there were times after that where we were together, and I felt very uplifted. And so it's once you become a couple, it's no longer just about the singular person, it's about the us. And so I feel like
it's not an I, it's an us.
Yes. You're feeling it today. This is good stuff. But marriage is a partnership, and it helps. It's in good times and bad times. I know, a lot of vows say in sickness and health and richer or poorer, which I think there were things that we didn't necessarily add in ours.
I think we said the basic vows.
I know, but I feel like there was something we left out. It was so long ago that I don't really remember. But I know there were some things that we chose to kind of not speak into our lives. But I know also we did say that, no matter what, we would be together. Lucky for you, you got stuck with me. So no matter what happens.
That's so very true.
But I do feel like together we've achieved more for our family, of course, because without each other we wouldn't really have the family that we have. But I feel like we've achieved more for our, together than we would have separately. Ephesians 5 talks about how husbands are to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So there is a part of your purpose in being married is, for me as the husband, is to love Heather the way that Jesus loves the church. There's John 3:16 talks about how And even though it's talking about God giving his son, Jesus came down and still made the decision to give himself up so that the people who would come to believe in him would be able to go to heaven. And so in the same way, we're supposed to love our spouse in a way that we give up ourselves. And it's not entirely like, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's in the self-defense kind of way, although I believe it is, but it's also, there may be things that, and I've had to learn this several times over, there's things that, as a husband, I have to give up, even if it's something I want, to make sure that, my wife is taken care of in things. It also talks about wives called to respect and submit to their husbands.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I think that the word submit can be warped at times to like, I'm going to just boss you around and tell you what to do. And I don't think that that's what was intended in that scripture at all. I think that a submission is like when we submit ourselves even to God, we give ourselves because, hey, we love you and we want to, give ourselves to you and submit. And I feel like that is when the husband is in line with what God, like, is a spirit-filled, godly man. That's when the submission is because he's leading the family in the way of the Lord, not just in the way that he feels like he wants to do. So I think that wives should definitely always, I think once you marry someone, there should be that level of respect there. I also think that the husbands and wives need to like give a reason for respect. I mean, I feel like there should be that reason there behind why you respect them and why you submit to them. And so I do agree with that. And I think for years, in the early years of our marriage, I think that maybe we had a different grasp on that scripture. And so I think that as we've matured and grown as a couple and spiritually, we've understood that doesn't mean you just get to like boss her. Now, if I know that, I think there's a difference in God telling the husband something and the husband just wanting something like, hey, you're my wife, so you have to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like if God's saying like, hey, Cameron, you need to move here, or I feel like, you need to give to this or give to that, and you approach me and the wives need to be like, okay, God has called you to do this. I will submit under that. You submit under your leadership, and the husband's supposed to be the head of the household. So in whatever the situation might be, like, I think that can be taken out of context, but if used properly, it can really beneficial to the relationship.
And before we got married, we were already engaged, but before we got married, I had been talking with my dad about things, and he was, explaining some things and, kind of giving me some pointers and advice. And he asked if I had any questions. And one of them was pertaining to this scripture about submitting. And because, like, if you think of it in like a martial arts type thing, a submission is a forced thing. If you're submitting, it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it. Sometimes it doesn't mean you're doing it with that being what your will is as well. Because if you both agree on something, it's not really submission in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu type of thing. You have submission moves where if you're forcing somebody into a position that hurts them, and then they will in turn tap a mat, which means, okay, I'll give up. You win. And so sometimes it can be like that. But again, like you were saying, first of all, what my dad was saying was, with submission, it's not you boss them around and they do whatever you say, but it is if you say, hey, this is what I feel like I'm supposed to do, and Heather says, okay, yeah, okay, we can do that, and she maybe doesn't see the point of it, or she doesn't understand it, or whatever, but she agrees to go along with it. That's a submission. That's a true submission. And if it all works out well, that's great. And Heather has gained trust in your decision making. But if she does, or if it doesn't go well, you have to own up to the fact that you maybe didn't make the best decision. And
You weren't led properly in that.
right. And there were times early on, like you were talking about, where there were things where sometimes it was things that I was wanting more so than I felt like we were being called to do. And when you try to operate on your own knowledge of things,
And not God's.
yes, God's way of doing things, whether it be love, whether it be really just love in general. And, we talked about this the other day. God's way of loving people is different than the way that people love people. And so as soon as you step out of God's way of doing things, you miss a lot of things that God has planned for you, because you may miss, milestones on your path that God has set up for you. And it's going to take a while before you get back there. The same way is if I, mislead our family, it might take you a minute to get back to where you're like, okay, recently we bought a car, and you had flashbacks to times early on when I bought cars, after barely mentioning it to you, and then within the same day going and buying one because we had talked about it. We never came to an agreement, but we did talk about it, so I went and did it, and then surprised you, or went out and picked up the dog and didn't tell you. And
we had a newborn, pretty much.
And so there's a lot of times where, you can set yourself up to make that submission idea very difficult on your wife.
But I think, when it says you're called to respect and submit, I think when there is the true respect in the relationship there submitting isn't as hard.
Yeah.
Because at that point, and I'm sure there are some marriages where you just jump right in and you just got it. I'm sure they're out there. But I know for us getting married, at me being 19 and you being 20 and being married, we were still just growing as teenager. I was 19, so I was a teenager. So I was
an old guy. I was 20.
Yeah. But so the idea, we hadn't actually walked out any really real life things. I was still living at home until we got married. And so the idea of respecting and submitting, we were in the feel good senior and high school stages of life. So I feel like when I loved you and I respected you and I cared for you, but I just think there's something to be said about a marriage that has gone through some things, and a wife who's worked through some different situations and, grown, like you said, spiritually, maybe had some struggles where your faith has been tested a minute in the relationship aspect of being completely honest, times where you're is this really going to even work?
And questioned our love.
And realizing that this is what God has called you to do, and knowing that even in the struggles, being no, this is where we're supposed to be, then it's easier to move forward in the next thing that comes up, because you're building that respect in all that. You're as a husband, you're showing that sacrificial love, and then in the wives, then in showing sacrificial love, respect is coming. And I just think that, any couple that has made it 14 years I'm 33 years old. I mean, I'm young in that sense. And so, any couple that has done that, there's a lot of growing there. I believe your 20s are years where you're figuring out career, you're raising children, or some people, in their 30s or 40s raising children, but you're raising children, you're establishing your relationship. And I just don't think that it's talked about enough about how sometimes it's not going to always just be ooey gooey fun feelings. Nope. You're gonna have to walk through some things. I mean, the Bible even says in our faith we're walking through things. So why do we think in our marriages we're not going to? And so it's just kind of those things there, though, as you've walked through them and chosen not to throw in a towel, not to be oh, this is too hard, because for some reason we get in everybody gets in this whole kick of when something's hard, that means it's not worth it. But the hard things are worth it. Yeah. They're more than worth it. So if you're in a marriage, when you're walking through these things, and maybe your respect in the relationship is being challenged, maybe that submission is feeling a little bit that uncomfortable, I think we talked about maybe in the last one about kind of sitting in the uncomfortable. So I think you and I have just talked about that before, about how sometimes you have to just kind of, even if it's not fun, you want to kind of sit in that uncomfortable. And, I think that's where the respect is built. And once you know that you're equally yoked in a marriage that God has blessed, and He's
I was making a move on you. Yeah, we'll push the cat off the couch.
But I think that's where that respect comes. I think that's where that submission comes. And that's when submission isn't hard. In respecting and loving that person, they're going to only make decisions that are for your well-being, as long as they're hearing from the Lord.
And we talked about it the other day. We talked about that sitting in things. we talked about the other day about how there was a video I saw where this guy was talking about how he's always fighting with his wife, he's always fighting his wife, and he'll have some good times and then they fight, and he went and talked to somebody, and maybe it was a pastor or a friend, mentor, something like that, but he went and talked to him and was like, hey, this is going on, like what's happening, like I don't want to do this. And the guy replied, he's like, well, okay, well, say you ended this, would you rather fight with someone else, or would you spend the rest of your life, if you had to fight with somebody, fighting with someone else or your wife? Which one would you rather pick? And the guy was like, I mean, if I'm gonna have to fight somebody, and not fighting like, but you're gonna argue, you're gonna not see eye to eye. If you always saw eye to eye, there wouldn't be scriptures in the Bible talking about submitting, because everything would just be,
Or
as you
how
said,
they're
ooey gooey.
sacrificial,
Yeah,
like you're being said,
yeah,
like,
or on the guy's part where we had to sacrifice things. Sacrifice isn't easy. Submission isn't easy. And if you notice here, the Bible gives, there's specific instructions for each party in the marriage. Husbands, love your wives.
they even
Wives,
talk about kids. I mean,
yeah,
we're not talking about children right now, but I mean, they didn't tell
yeah.
children to obey.
And you
And
talk
that's not
about,
easy either.
yeah, husbands, love your wives. And then you're called to do it sacrificially. Like, neither one of those, again, are easy. Wives, respect and submit. We talked about, I think in the last episode or the first episode, about those things, like that husbands need respect, and when they feel respected, they feel loved. And wives, when they feel loved, it just makes that God knew how men and women were wired, mainly because he's the one that wired them. And so, but the guy ended up saying, back to the video that I was watching, he was like, man, if I'm going to pick, I would rather fight with her. So I mean, you're good. No relationship is without a fight, but it's like you said, the good things are worth fighting for.
But even like, you and I talk a lot of times about like fighting the good fight of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And none of that is in your faith walk. But if you're going to have to work towards something, the devil doesn't want to see any Christian succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But we have overcome that because of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but that again doesn't mean that there aren't going to be things that come up. Now, I don't believe that every single day needs to be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we already talked about love keeping no record of wrong in previous. And so right there, like in some of these situations, there are ways to kind of move forward
Mm-hmm.
in these things. But if you're like fighting that good fight of faith in your faith walk, you can also fight that good fight of faith within your marriage, because if you know that God has placed you in this relationship, then you're not going to fail, because he will not let that happen. And so as long as you don't get in so fleshly or that I want this, because this isn't all about me and you're not taking care of me, or whatever the situation might be, as long as you're realizing that this is of God, and that there's going to be things that try to drive a wedge, but that does not need to happen, because we have a purpose in our marriage. And again, the devil will never want to see that purpose succeed, but God will always make sure that purpose does succeed, because that's what he has created in us. He has given us that. He wants us to be like Jesus, and Jesus had a mission, and he did it. He is the ultimate finisher when it comes to his mission. And so I force us to be like him then, once our purpose is as a marriage, as an individual, whatever that might be, we're not going to fail, even when things get challenging, unless we choose to fail. But that shouldn't be an option. That should be off the table.
And you talking about the me, and like when you kind of see it from, we talked about recently where we were talking about kind of once you really put your finger on love languages, which I know we talked about before, but once you really realize that, and if you're really doing it as a love language, I'm not cleaning the house because I hope it in turn will make Heather treat me nicer or do whatever else for me. I know this would mean a lot to Heather, so I'm going to do this for her. Or, Heather, we've talked about ours, and lately she'll do things that's as simple as like, minus touch, but she'll do things as like simple as like scratch my back. The other night at the football game, when I'm sitting on the floor in front of you, or holding my hand, or, little things like that, it makes a big difference. And so, talking about the me thing, so that's going to wrap it up. Thanks again for tuning in. This has been a blast, and we will see you in the next one. Again, don't forget to take a look at all of our links. We've released a devotional. It's available on Amazon, either ebook or on as a paperback. And so if you want that, that would be great. There's going to be links down below. If you would like for us to release it as an audiobook with Morgan Freeman's voice, let us know. We can try to figure that out. But thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yes.
See you.
That makes sense.
So gangster.
Dada, dada, shot collar.